and spoke on Mars Hill, the first thing he didn't go up there and say, I'm going to quote Isaiah 44, which is a mockery of all idolatry. Rather, he said, you're a very religious people. And so he opened up with the idea, I respect who you are. Now let me tell you about the God I believe in. And he didn't attack their gods. He explained who God was and how that can influence people around him. And so whatever book we may be reading, whether it's Romans, again, or 1 Corinthians, Ephesians, Philippians, whatever one, we see these practical ideas of going out into the world and not just in the churches, but in the world, how we can get along. You may see two people who you knew were in conflict now working together. You may see a person who was very influential in some part of the Roman world. We know there were Christians in Caesar's household. And now they're Christians, they're practicing this religion. They weren't perfect at it. We're not perfect at it. They struggled. We struggled. But they were influential in a number of ways, quietly. And that's maybe where we sometimes think we got to go out and, be very aggressive when we can be impact those around us by the people we come in contact with. We all come in contact with people no one else comes in contact with. And that's the benefit of being a Christian. We will have influence on others around us. And so, anyway, that's some of the things that we're going to look at. Ephesians 5:5 says that greed is idolatry. So when we talk about idolatry today, well, it's interesting. Paul really changes the focus of idolatry from an idol itself to greed. And we can think of other things like power or fame or money, which goes to greed. And these are things that people seek. They want somewhere in that area one of those things. Money, they may want more than one, but some people want power, some people want to be famous. And these are all fleeting things. People who went out to be famous, they find a big surprise that not everybody knows who they are. I don't know, I've been to Malibu. If there was a movie star walk by, I would have no idea. It's not my thing. A baseball player wouldn't recognize a baseball or football player. I didn't even know who plays for the Texans that much. I know they have a quarterback. I don't know what his name is. And it's just not in my thinking there. Money. You can make a lot of money. Some people want to keep making money. You lose a lot of money. Does it? What happens? Society, things change. People make mistakes. People blow it in some way. And then there's the power aspects. I want power until someone else comes along more powerful. Or you lose power in some way. And so we have these idols, but they're not like we build statues to, for the most part. Maybe some people do. But we have these different things that we look at. So power, fame, and fortune is something that people are attracted to. That as Christians, we realize power that's not the type of power we want control and over others, but rather we want to give God's power to people. We want to recognize God rules, that He's the one that we need to appeal to. And we do that not as one who seeks it, being powerful, but as one who is humble and willing to serve. And it's in service that real power comes to light. And we see that in Jesus, we see that in others in the Bible. So those are some of the things that we find. Yet today, idolatry can be very subtle. There was a politician who made a comment I thought was kind of interesting. This politician said that the Capitol is sacred ground. Now, there's a lot of things about the U.S. Capitol in D.C. that I can talk about, but sacred ground is just not one of them. Okay, that does not come to mind. It's a building. There's a lot of nice things in it. It's a nice place to visit, but it's not sacred ground. It's just a building. And sometimes we get carried away with how we say things, and then maybe we better be careful what we're saying in those areas. And it's just like this past Olympics. A broadcaster was watching a athlete get ready for the high jump, and this woman was standing there with her hands up. And so the commentator says, why, she's praying to the gods of the Olympics, to the gods of sport. And you know, that was sort of went passing by. Come to find out she's a Christian and she was praying to God. How do you miss things, you know? And how do you view things? And so we may just people may innocently say the gods of whatever, and it's some sport or business or whatever might come along. And I know there's some sayings that people use, and you'll hear it on in sports or on TV every once in a while. The God, you praying to the gods have been good, or
There's a commercial, I don't know what the company is, it's like a debt relief, and the lady's like, such and such debt relief, they're my savior. It always hits my ear when I hear that, I'm like, don't say that.
Yeah, there you go. We have these subtle things that we say. We use words, people use words, obviously, that relate to how we would talk, but they're not used in the same context, and you have to wonder, do you understand what you're saying? So we have to be careful what we say, because we don't want to mislead people in that as well.
I think also, anything we do that we know is in contradiction to God serves as, for in that moment, serves as our God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we do that a lot without even knowing, you know, it might be because of some physical impulse, or because it might help us get ahead a little bit.
Right.
And that's serving as our God at that time.
Yeah, and I know it's easy to do because, you know, we talk about teen idols, you remember that phrase? Some of us, we're old enough. And, you know, it's the same that, you know, well, they're not, you know, that, you hear that, but I always was bothered by it. And why do we make them idols? Some of their standards or behavior are not anywhere near that. So how do these things affect society? How did the Christians and that culture come together, or at least were working in some way? The Christians over the first 3 centuries or so influenced culture. They changed culture, but they didn't go out and with swords or again loud meetings or things. They did it by how they lived. And they began to influence culture, and things began to change. It was a threat to the empire at times. Again, we talked a little bit about persecution, that while there wasn't always empire-wide persecution, there were a couple of times. A lot of it was local persecution because they were threatened. Sort of like, again, in Ephesus with Paul and Artemis, and the god of Ephesus, which god was that? Anyway, and they were getting all upset and almost had a riot type of thing. But Ephesus became a leading city in Christianity in the 2nd and 3rd century. So obviously Christians were able to influence and change that city by their behavior and the way they did things. Now, again, we're not perfect. Things changed over the course after that, and Christianity got power, and that became a problem. But these are things that how we can influence society in a number of ways. So the rest of this class, I'm going to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a little while. So since I'm teaching the class, I get to do that. starts with a little interesting story. Richard Dawkins is a leading atheist. He has said some very nasty things about God. He has ridiculed Christianity for a number of years. And it's also attacked Islam as well, and that hasn't got over too well, but he continues to do that. So when you hear Richard Dawkins' name, you kind of think, yeah, we know what he's thinking about, and there's been some debates with other Christians and things like that. Well, a couple of years ago, he was being interviewed somewhere, and he just kind of casually mentioned, you know, around Advent season, I like to go to church. Huh? And of course, that got everybody's attention. Why? This comes from my youth. I heard the songs, the music, and again, this is high church, so it's a little bit different than what we're familiar with. And the stories that were told, and they just make me feel good. They make me just recall maybe youth, or they just draw me in to a different level than I normally think about. And then he made a statement. I may be a cultural Christian. Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about. What is a cultural Christian? And this can go good or bad. It's not defining the term in any central particular way. It's how it's used by the individual using it. It's taking two words, cultural and Christian, and putting them together, and everybody goes, oh, a new thing. Well, not exactly. While it may be a new way to put two words together, it's something that has been around for years, centuries. And the one illustration, I've had several, but the one I'm interested in is Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher in the early 1800s, looked at his society. He watched people walking around and said, Christianity is having no effect on anybody. They're just doing what they want to do. And so he ended up writing about existentialism and whatever, developed that. I think that was probably a very limited view of society at the time, an assumption he made. But anyway, so that was one of the things that were going on, that it's not something new, it's just a new way of saying it. What is cultural Christianity? Well, I don't exactly know where the phrase came from, but I think it comes from a book by Tom Holland. He's a British historian. The book's name is Dominion. And what he's done is he has written this 600-plus page book and looked at Christianity in Europe and how it has impacted Europe over the 20 centuries. And he just looks at different things in different ways. One of the interesting chapters that drew my attention is the chapter entitled The Somme, S-O-M-M-E, which is a famous World War I battle. The first day of the battle, 40,000 British soldiers were killed. It was one of the most massive, bloodiest battles of World War I and possibly history. It ended up being almost, when you look back at it, one side throwing their troops against the other side, and then the other side throwing them back, throwing other troops back. And when it was over, over a million men were dead. It was a horrible, horrible battle. And he looked at it and said, and he went, why would he pick this as a way of impacting Christianity, how Christianity could impact society? Well, then he talked about J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien was a British artillery officer during the battle. He developed trench fever, ended up back in England in a hospital for about a year, finally recovered from that. And he goes on to talk about Tolkien studying Norse history and things like that. And finally, he started writing a little book called The Hobbit. And and then followed that up with Lord of the Rings. And he based his book partly on his experience in World War I and his Catholic upbringing. And a lot of what he said, this is not a Christian book. It is filled with those types of ideas. And why is Lord of the Rings so popular? That it's been sold over and over and over again in the 70 years since it's been published, and major movies made, and because of the battle between good and evil, and the idea that evil goes away, but it comes back. And so that's just one of the number of things that are found in his book. Well, Tom Holland basically said, yeah, this is, it's this impact in Europe on that Christianity has had. And then he was interviewed, and he began talking about, well, yeah, I may be a cultural Christian. I see how Christianity has affected society. And so, yeah, I respect that perspective, that Christians are having some impact on society, or Christianity did. But then he was interviewed on a podcast with a British theologian, and then with another theologian, N.T. Wright. And they had this long discussion about Christianity, about his book, and about how all this comes together. And as he went along, he began to say, you know, there's more to this. And then he wrote an article later on and said, you know, I've been thinking about this idea of Christianity, and I may just be a Christian. Not a cultural Christian, but a Christian. I see this maybe has more value than I thought. And it's not just the impact on society, but the impact on individuals, on people's lives. And so that was an interesting little comment that was made. And he seems to be moving in that direction toward being more, maybe I need to take a really hard look at what it means to be a Christian, not just cultural Christianity, but Christian itself. So in a subtle way, here is an idea that popped up, and it's impacting people who have heard, are hearing this idea. Cultural Christianity, not a bad thing in some ways. Maybe it's something we can say to others. You know, we're so influenced by Christianity in a number of ways, and just look at some of the ideas that come along. On the same podcast at another time was another atheist named Douglas Murray. Also, N.T. Wright was there, and they began to discuss just different things from Murray's perspective. He writes a lot on Europe. And after the podcast finished, there were a number of articles that came out. Is Douglas Murray moving toward Christianity by the things he was saying? And so I found that kind of interesting, that he has, that there are people who are thinking about these things who you would say, why would an atheist be thinking about that type of thing? And so it's something for us to consider. Are people can we be effective as Christians and cause people to think, when you go to church, why do you do that? Why do you have the Lord's Supper? Why are you interested in talking about the resurrection and other things like that? Then there's and these are anecdotes, okay? So this is not, I don't know, this is going to be a movement. I don't know how this is going to affect things, but another one is Jordan Peterson. He's a Canadian, and you've probably heard of him. He's written a couple of books. He is a psychologist. He has gotten himself into trouble by saying, I'm not, I see, you need just to be, you're a human being. There's men, there's women, let's not go into extremes here. And he's even been told that he cannot practice until he takes a course on this is how you should approach things. So I don't know how that turned out. And he's been asked about his view of Christianity a number of times. And he's kind of, at first said, nah, that's fine, I'm just gonna push that aside. There may be some similarities. And then he kind of wrote a book and said, well, maybe there's more to it, but again, I'm more interested in the psychological side. And that sort of follows what Professor Richard Beck at Abilene Christian view is. He's a psychologist, but he said there's more going on there, and we need to keep that in mind. Well, now Peterson's come out, a new book coming out next month. Interesting title: We Who Wrestle with God, Perceptions of the Divine. Now, I don't know where this guy is. I think this book's going to be on psychology, but I was looking at some of the things that are going to be in it. He's looking at almost every story in the Old Testament, and maybe some of the New. And is he going to look at it from a psychological point of view? And is that that? Is that that? Or is there some positive things that can come out of it? And so that's again, and I'm just bringing up these things. Another one, gotta find it here, is another atheist, Jason Hill, professor at DePaul University. I read several of his articles, one of which is an article in which he talks about how he went to had a class, and in his class, Hill is a black man, so in his class he had white supremacists and KKK people. And he talks about their interaction and the discussions they had. And it's kind of an interesting thing to read. But he's an atheist. And so he worked out of that perspective until not too long ago, when this book, which comes out next year, Letters to God from a Former Atheist. What's going on here? Now, these are not just simple people. These are people who are actually well respected in their fields. And surprisingly, why are they talking about this? What's drawing them to becoming more interested in God or Christianity or other things like that? Just this past week, this popped up. I was really surprised. The title is, it's an article, Richard Dawkins, the Unlikely Evangelist. What? I gotta read this article. And the title of the book that this is based on is Coming to Faith Through Dawkins. 12 different scientists and educators and some other people discuss how they came to faith because of what Richard Dawkins wrote. Now remember, he said some pretty nasty things about God. So they're looking at his material, and they have come to faith because of what Richard Dawkins wrote.
Even there's that famous magician Penn Jillette, Penn Teller. He's famously atheist, and then there's the story about the person that gave him the Bible, and he actually looked at it, and he encourages evangelism. He's not religious, but he at least respects Christians and doesn't trash.
Yeah. We don't know what impact or influence we'll have. We don't know. Again, it goes back to this cultural Christianity. Who influenced these people in Caesar's household? How do you find some of the politicians of Rome coming and becoming Christians? Others who said, I want to hear more about Jesus. And so there's all these kind of things that are going on in society. I mentioned Richard Beck a few minutes ago. I'm bringing up all these books. I don't expect you to buy them, but it's helping me to kind of see an impact of and in a quiet way. Not in a way that just blasts everything, but in a quiet way of how we are influencing people to look at God and Jesus and the Bible and things in a different way, or to be drawn in to look at that and see what's going on.
Well, I remember back in the '70s, early '80s, there was a man, he was atheist, and he was out to prove that everybody else was wrong, and he ended up being a Christian.
Right.
C.S. Lewis.
No,
So many.
John Clayton, yeah.
Another book, I apologize, I'm bringing up all these books, but they just the titles and some of the article I've read around these titles interest me. The global south, which would be Africa, South America, Asia, the church is growing. People are coming to Christ. People are seeking out God in many ways. But these people will have idols, so there's that interaction there. They believe in river gods. They believe in other types of gods and demons and things like that. And two books, I'll go with books again. One by Richard Beck out of ACU, and one book that just came out by a fellow named Rob Dreyer, who used to write for the New York Times, moved to Louisiana, has been writing about Christianity. He's a member of the, one of the not Episcopalian, but anyway, something connected to the Church of England. And he wrote a book called Living in Wonder, Finding Mystery and Meaning in, let me get the rest of the title there. Mystery and Meaning in a Secular Age. And he's looking and saying, both Beck and him call it enchantment. We've lost the enchantment. We're scientists. Take the science. Enlightenment, the idea of we know. And so we have science proves this proves that, and so forth and so on. And so we've lost that mystery. And if you think about it, what is one of the big debates we have about? It's about the Holy Spirit. It's about demons. It's about, is there a devil? Because we've lost the mystery of something beyond just what we can see. And if you think about it, that's the sort of way North America and Europe is. You know, there's no, oh, we know all these things. We know there's no demons. And so we have psychologists that can tell us there isn't, and the scientists proved, and so forth and so on. And yet, in other parts of the world, they see it totally different. And they're being attracted to the gospel because they see the power of Jesus changing lives.
So, as I'm listening to this, the areas of the world that you're talking about, the Africa, South America, Asia, their economic situations are much different than what we experience. And the fact that the church is growing, with the fact that Jesus' teaching focused on giving hope to oppressed, to poor, to the, for lack of a better term, the less thans, those that are not part of the high, have that high status. And so those being the majority of the people in these areas, would that be contributing to that?
There's no doubt about that. But again, when we read in the New Testament, it wasn't just the poor, and even the historians are saying, it wasn't just the poor that were attracted to Christianity. You know, again, people in Caesar's household. Phoebe was probably a pretty wealthy woman because she was, I forget the word, but she helped support or was able to, she carried the letter to Rome, so she was able to do that. She had the means to do that. So and again, men and women, we tend to say, well, it's all the men, but you know, there's Phoebe and several others. You have Philip's daughters and things like that. So yes, to your question, And yet, I think there's more to it.
Well, would that have contributed to the others, though? The ones in Caesar's household were likely initially, servants or women or
Slaves.
somebody that when they started accepting different, they started behaving differently because of their belief that Caesar, whoever the governors or whoever was in power, and it was, saw that and said, well, these people that, we're treating them very poorly and they have nothing, they're still content. They're still behaving differently.
Right.
Why is that? Could that, you think that contributed to then the more wealthy and the rulers and Caesars and them to say, okay, maybe I need to figure out what's going on here?
Yeah, I think that these impacts are gonna happen. People are gonna look and say, that's not the type of servant. Well, I remember when he was just a pain in the neck, and now today he'd do anything. And it's just the attitude that they had to change that was brought about, that we're servants of all. And so it doesn't matter who you are. And in comparison to the South and the North, as far as global situation, we have our three idols there, the power, the fame, the fortune. We think that's gonna get us. And we look at the global South and see this, we're gonna look down on those people, they don't know what they're doing. They're having a greater impact. This goes back to 1976. One of my teachers said, because we're not going out into the world, God's gonna send the world to us. Guess who's coming? People from the global South.
I think one of the interesting aspects of what you're saying, and I'm kind of agreeing, is that the cultural Christianity is able to influence regardless of what the need of the person, the individual is, because there's something in everyone that you're looking for that you don't have, that you need, that you want, whether it's food or peace or acceptance or whatever. There's something lacking in every one of us. And when it's a cultural item, then there's more ways for that thing to be shown as something that is attainable. And that person is gonna be attracted to that, whether it's food in South America or influence or peace with some of these writers. Because some of those writers, they're very angry. They're just very angry, and it just comes through in their writings. And they see Christians around them who don't really get riled up about it. And they're like, there's gotta be something wrong with them. And they're smart people, so they look into it. And their needs are addressed in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's just the impact that we can have.
Exactly.
And let me bring up one more, and then we kind of throw it open, or, I'll get going. Really interested in. Remember a year or two ago, Ashbury, Kentucky, a little college there, had a big revival, and this went on for about a month. People came from all over, the little town was overwhelmed, so much so they finally had to stop it because they couldn't handle it. It was just, when you're a town of a couple thousand and you have 20,000 people pop up, it's a little rough. And so and it was college students that came in. And so, anyway, it made the news, and for a little while, and this, they call it revival going on, and a lot of kids going and saying, and being baptized and wanting to hear more of the good news. Well, I saw a news report a couple months ago. It's happening again. We're not hearing about it, but the report was there were at least 10 universities that had happened, and the one that they were reporting on was the University of Arkansas, and so they had again out in the middle of the stadium, baptistry set up. There was preaching. There was all, and kids were coming from hundreds and hundreds of miles away just to experience it, to see what was going on. These are things that are happening. Now, what happens then is that they go back. What then? Well, you think about it. An Ethiopian eunuch
Yeah.
is baptized on a road in the middle of nowhere, and we never hear another story about it. But you go to Ethiopia and you look at some of the church history, and the church's been around for 2,000 years. You know, one guy can have an impact. How he can maybe say something to another person who can say something to another, and all of a sudden this gets to be gone. And while our experience again is in Europe, because that's where Paul's writings are, we don't know a lot about the Eastern aspects of Christianity going further east. We know, unfortunately, the one library that would have had information in it was destroyed, so the Eastern churches we're not that familiar with, but they've had an impact over the years. We know Arabia, there was some impact. Egypt, you got the Coptic church, there's some things there. So, there are things just happened over the course of time that had an impact on culture. And I think this is the way we see the first century. That they impacted where they were, and it spread. And so we have people, because of modern communication, books, TV, computers and all that, can impact people and have it spread. It's just how we look at one another. It's not going out and winning arguments, it's going out and saying, hey, here's why I do what I do. Or somebody asking a question, why do you do this? Remember was it last week or the week? We preached last week. And anyway, he goes with the illustration of being in the airport, and the guy, he didn't want to talk, and the guy asked, and he answered the question. Well, that's an impact on somebody that could have influence down the road. That guy could have gone somewhere else and said, I heard this, and gain some insight in that. So I think these are some of the ways that we can deal with the idolatry that we see in our society today, even though it's not with statues and whatever type of thing. So anybody want to make some comments? Go ahead.
You said something I thought was really interesting. Maybe I'm missing the story a little bit, but you said there was a professor that was atheist that potentially converted to Christianity, and his class the students were mainly KKK and white supremacists, which they typically have very strong Christianity. May not. What my point is I can't think of a worse group of people to evangelize, but yet God still somehow worked his message through to the professor, and I thought that was really interesting.
Now, a little bit more. He did grow up in a Christian home, but became an atheist. So, just to throw that in there. But yeah, it's and you can go on, just look up Jason Dill, and you can probably find the article. It's kind of interesting. Again, so now he didn't convert everybody. He didn't convince everybody that was a member of KKK, but he did make some.
It was the other direction. I'm sorry. I thought the professor was the atheist. But
Yeah, he is. The professor's the atheist.
Okay.
But he didn't convince, the discussion, he didn't convince everybody to change as far as, but he got people to look at him as well. That here's what, as a black person, this is who I am. And so there was some open discussion, not everybody, but he made some strong points, and I thought, again, an interesting article. Now, I don't know what impact that had on the book he's written, and he may explain that in the book. So that's, but it's still interesting that you had this discussion in a group that you would never think would do anything, and you're the one that's writing about God now. Well, where did that come from? Just throw it out. Anyway, go ahead.
I think one thing you're kind of talking about throughout this is and you look back at scripture, it was very much a grassroots relational
conversational
Right.
thing that caused it to spread widely.
Right.
And I think where we see it go wrong often, in the global north is there's a desire to make it, you saw this very much in the past in Europe, and it's an effort that's continually being made in the US to make Christianity this power grab.
Yeah.
That if we can just force everybody to do it our way, then we'll just have a nice, peaceful society because everybody will agree. But where Christianity is effective is just, it's a sweeping person by person move. It's not a top-down
Right.
influential movement. It's a bottom-up influential movement.
Change
And I
parts
think-
one at a time.
Right, and if you force someone top-down to do
Right.
the Christian way, you're missing the entire point of what it is.
Again, I would refer you to Tom Holland's book.
Yeah.
He addresses some of that in the war, Christianity's, again, good and bad. There were the wars, in the religious wars of Europe, that is, quite nice. There were the Pope and the idea of becoming like Roman government type of thing. So we'll control everything. Even in the Protestant world, we rule this city. So you do what we tell. No, it's not about power. And I think that's again, the three idols that we see throughout history: power, money, and fame. Power is, we've got to resist power. And we see it even in the church sometimes. People want power. What can I control? And that's not what it's about. It's about relations. It's about getting along. It's about how we can help one another and how we can encourage one another. So anyway, I don't want to preach too long. I get in trouble. Any other comments? You all want donuts, I guess. Well, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it. Again, there's a bunch of donuts out there. If you want to stand around and talk, that's fine too. Okay. I'm done. Nobody's.